Okay, we should perhaps begin this evening with a warning similar to the type that we hear on the news from time to time, that the story we're about to look at contains some details that some people may find upsetting. This is the story of Dinah in Genesis chapter 34, and we'll begin reading the passage here, chapter 34 of Genesis, and we'll read verses 1 to 7 to begin with here. Now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, Jacob, went out to visit the women of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he seized her and lay with her and humbled her. And his soul was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the maiden and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this maiden for my wife." Now Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter Dinah, but his sons were with his cattle in the field. So Jacob held his peace until they came. And Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. The sons of Jacob came in from the field when they heard of it, and the men were indignant and very angry, because he had wrought folly in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter. For such a thing ought not to be done. Chapter 34 here records a tragic incident in the story of Jacob and his family, and the story concerns Dinah, the daughter of Leah. She's already been named for us back in chapter 30 and verse 21. Chapter 30 verse 21 says, afterwards she, that's referring to Leah, bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. And she's the last of Leah's children who were born to Jacob. Told here that Dinah went out to visit the women of the land. And at this time, Jacob is settled around the town of Shechem, which you can see circled in red on the map there. Jacob had been on the eastern side of the Jordan, as we saw last week, where he had crossed the Jabbok River and had met up with Esau, and then instead of following Esau down south to the territory of Edom, he had crossed over into the land of Canaan, and now he was settled around the town of Shechem. So this is where this incident is taking place, and Dinah, we're told here, went out to visit the women of the land. So she's within her own family group and decides that she will go out and have a look and interact with the women of the land of Canaan. It would perhaps have been against the customs of the time, really, for a young unmarried girl to have gone out on her own like this. And calculating from other ages that are given to us and the sort of sequence of events, she's probably around 14 or 15 years old at this time. So as she's out, she was seen by Shechem. He is the son of Hamor the Hivite. The Hivites were some of the people who lived in the land of Canaan, and Hamor is the prince of the land, which means really that he's the local chief over that particular region. Well, Shechem seized Dinah and raped her. This is the word rape is used in the New International Version and the New American Standard Bible. In the Revised Standard Version, it says that he humbled her. The word, which is the Hebrew word translated here, is and it can be a general word for being humbled or humiliated or oppressed or afflicted in some way. But the context here would seem to suggest that rape is involved, or certainly non-consensual sex is involved here. But although he had raped her, Shechem was attracted to Dinah, and he had fallen in love with her, and he spoke tenderly to her. Literally, the text would be translated as he spoke to her heart. So he longed then for her to become his wife. And so he went to his father Hamor and asked for his help in arranging a marriage. Meanwhile, Jacob had heard what Shechem had done to Dinah, but as his sons were in the field with the cattle, He did not say anything until they returned home. Hamor then came to visit and came to speak to Jacob, hoping to arrange this marriage between his son Shechem and Jacob's daughter Dinah. When Jacob's sons heard what had happened to Dinah, they were indignant and very angry. And it was considered to be a shameful thing, something that should never have happened. The phrase used there in verse 7, he had wrought folly in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, indicates what an abhorrent act this was. Later actions are also described in similar terms to this in Joshua chapter 7 verse 15 in the case of Achan. Joshua chapter 7 verse 15, when Achan has taken some of the things devoted to destruction at Jericho, the judgment is, and he who is taken with the devoted things shall be burned with fire, he and all that he has, because he has transgressed the covenant of the Lord, and because he has done a shameful thing in Israel, brought shame upon Israel by his actions. And then in Judges chapter 20 and verse 6, in another unpleasant incident recorded in Judges chapter 20, verse 6, this is the Levite here. He said, I took my concubine and cut her in pieces and sent her throughout all the country of the inheritance of Israel, for they have committed abomination and wantonness in Israel, referring there to the actions of the things that had happened to his concubine, which involved rape there as well. And again, he uses that similar phrase that those who had done this to her, they have committed abomination and wantonness in Israel. And then in 2 Samuel chapter 13 and verse 12, which is the case of Amnon and Tamar here, 2 Samuel chapter 13 verse 12, this is David's son Amnon, who is attracted to his half-sister Tamar and wants to lie with her here, and she's trying to resist him. She says to him, no, my brother, do not force me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do this wanton folly. So again, that same sort of language used there, that foolishness, that folly, this sort of behavior. So this is not the kind of thing that is done in Israel, is what these statements are indicating. So the whole community is affected, and disgrace is brought upon all of the community by this act. And so when Jacob's sons here say of what Shechem has done, that he has wrought folly in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, that it has affected all of us in this community. And we note here the use of the name Israel in verse 7 as well, that he had wrought folly in Israel. That was the new name that Jacob has been given. Here it seems to be being used in the sense of the whole community of Jacob's family. If we read on now in verses 8 to 12, we see the continuation of the story. The picture thereon is of the region of Shechem, as it is today. It's known as Nablus, and it lies between those two mountains, Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. So that's what the terrain looks like where these things are happening, or at least how it looks today. Chapter 34, then verses 8 to 12 says this, but Hamor spoke with them, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. I pray you give her to him in marriage. Make marriages with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. You shall dwell with us, and the land shall be open to you. Dwell and trade in it, and get property in it. Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me I will give. Ask of me ever so much as marriage present and gift, and I will give according as you say to me. Only give me the maiden to be wife. Shechem's soul then longed for Dinah. So Hamor spoke to Jacob and his sons, asking that Dinah should be given in marriage to Shechem. Hamor proposed that Jacob's family and Hamor's people could intermarry, they could dwell together, they would be able to trade and acquire property. And Hamor hoped that this proposal would be enough then to entice Jacob into agreeing to this marriage, in giving Dinah in marriage to Shechem, and so establish this alliance between these communities. Shechem, we're told, also spoke to Jacob and his sons, offering to give them whatever they asked for as a dowry, as a gift, as he was so desperate to have Dinah as his wife. But there is no expression of any kind of sorrow or repentance for the wrong that he had done to Dinah. Reading on then, verses 13 to 17 says this: the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully, because he had defiled their sister Dinah. They said to them, we cannot do this thing, to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we consent to you, that you will become as we are, and every male of you be circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters to ourselves, and we will dwell with you and become one people. But if you will not listen to us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter, and we will be gone. Jacob's sons responded to the offer made by Hamor and Shechem then with this deceitful answer, because they knew that Shechem had defiled their sister. They knew what had happened to her. And they said that they could not give their sister to one who was not circumcised, that such a thing would be a disgrace to them. Only on the condition that all of the males of Hamor's people should be circumcised would they then be willing to give their sisters and daughters in marriage. And then they would all dwell together and they would become one people. But if they're not willing to agree to this condition of circumcision, then they say they will take their sister and they will be gone. We will be out of here if you don't agree. We see in this how Jacob's sons were misusing the institution or the practice of circumcision. God had given circumcision to Abraham as a sign of the covenant that God had made with Abraham and his family and his descendants. But here Jacob's sons are trying to use it in a deceitful way to accomplish their own ends in this. We're reading on now verses 18 to 24. The story goes on. Their words pleased Hamor and Hamor's son Shechem, and the young man did not delay to do the thing, because he had delight in Jacob's daughter. Now he was the most honored of all his family. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, these men are friendly with us. Let them dwell in the land and trade in it, for behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters in marriage, and let us give them our daughters. Only on this condition will the men agree to dwell with us, to become one people, that every male among us be circumcised as they are circumcised. Will not their cattle, their property, and all their beasts be ours? Only let us agree with them, and they will dwell with us. And all who went out of the gate of his city hearkened to Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of his city. So the proposal then was from Jacob's sons was acceptable to Hamor and Shechem. And Shechem wasted no time in getting himself circumcised. Again, such was his love for Dinah that he was seems to be willing to do anything in order to gain her. Hamor and Shechem then went to the gate of the city. The gate of the city is the place where the local leaders would meet together, where business would be discussed. And so they spoke to the men of the city and they put this proposal to them. And Hamor presented a good, convincing case, saying that Jacob and his family are friendly towards them. They're nice people to be around. And the land is large enough to support all of us. And if marriages take place between the two groups, then they will gain the cattle and the property and the beasts that belong to Jacob and his family. So everyone will benefit from this arrangement. Everyone's a winner in this situation. The only condition is that they should be circumcised as Jacob and his sons are. So on hearing the proposal, the men of the city agree with it. They can see the advantage of establishing this alliance with Jacob and his family, and so they agree to the condition of circumcision, and then all of the males of the city, all the men of the city, then undergo circumcision. Well, we read on verses 25 to 31 to the end of the story. On the third day, when they saw two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and came upon the city unawares and killed all the males. They slew Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. And the sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city because their sister had been defiled. They took their flocks and their herds, their asses, and whatever was in the city and in the field, all their wealth, all their little ones and their wives, all that was in the houses, they captured and made their prey. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me by making me odious to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed, both I and my household." But they said, "Should he treat our sister as a harlot?" So on the third day, then, after the men of the city had been circumcised, and whilst they're still in pain, still in sore from this minor operation, therefore they are unable to defend themselves, two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, who were also full brothers of Dinah, they too were sons of Leah, they went into the city and they killed all of the males there with their swords, including Hamor and Shechem. They rescued Dinah from Shechem's house and they left. And this is the first time that we learn that Dinah was being kept there in Shechem's house since the incident began. So it would appear then that she had not only been raped, but she had been abducted as well and was being kept there in Shechem's house whilst these arrangements were being made for her marriage. The rest of Jacob's sons then arrived. They plundered the city in retaliation for Dinah's defilement. They took the flocks, herds, asses, and whatever was in the city and in the field, and they took all of the wealth of the city, and they took as captive the children and the wives. Verse 29 says they made them their prey. So like a bird of prey coming down, or a pack of wolves coming and taking these things. When Jacob heard what had happened, he rebuked Simeon and Levi, telling them that they had brought trouble upon him by making him odious, making him like a bad smell to the Canaanite and the Perizzite inhabitants of the land. Jacob realizes his own numbers are few, and if the inhabitants of the land decided to attack him in revenge, he and his household would be destroyed, they wouldn't stand a chance, and then he would lose everything. But Simeon and Levi answered Jacob simply by saying, "Should he treat our sister as a harlot?" They seem unconcerned about these other possible consequences of their actions, that all they are concerned about is in restoring the reputation of their sister and avenging her. No one really comes out of this incident with very much credit at all. Shechem committed an evil act in what he did to Dinah, but his subsequent love for her and his desire to marry her seems genuine. Dinah's brothers were deceptive in proposing that the men of the city be circumcised in order to enter into a covenant with them, and they misused that institution of circumcision, used it as an excuse to attack the men of the city. And then in doing that, they were excessive in extracting their revenge for Dinah's defilement. Why did all of those men in the city have to die for this? So their actions were unjustified and treacherous. Jacob shows a lack of leadership in dealing with the situation. When he heard of Dinah's rape, he did not say anything about it, and he remains silent throughout until he rebukes Simeon and Levi at the end here. He seems more concerned about upsetting the local inhabitants and is worried about how they will react to the actions of his sons. Jacob's final words to Simeon and Levi, which are recorded in chapter 49, verses 5 to 7, show us how he regarded them and something of the character of these men. In Genesis chapter 49, verses 5 to 7, this is Jacob blessing his sons just before his own death. And in verse 5, he says, Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. O my soul, come not into their counsel. O my spirit, be not joined to their company. For in their anger they slay men, and in their wantonness they hamstring oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. We see something in those words of the violent behavior of Simeon and Levi and their anger that they displayed. So perhaps that was a trait of their own character. And in those words, there's a prophecy there, I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel, that when the Israelites entered the land of Canaan, the land that was allotted to Simeon, they sort of lost their identity. They became amalgamated with the tribe of Judah, and so they sort of lose out in that sense. And Levi, of course, became the priestly tribe, and they didn't get any land there either. So they were scattered throughout Israel in their priestly cities, which were allocated to them. So there's a fulfillment of that prophecy there in later events as well. But we see something of the character and the behavior of Simeon and Levi in those words of Jacob there. There's one voice that we do not hear in this story, and that's the voice of the victim. That's the voice of Dinah. She's just there as an incidental character almost. These things happen to her, and we don't hear what she thinks about the situation or how she felt about any of this. And also someone else who's not mentioned in this chapter is God. No reference to God in this chapter at all. So these are tragic events that happen here, but there are perhaps things that we can learn and draw from for ourselves as we reflect upon this. So I'll stop sharing here and invite